maybe I'll talk a little bit longer about being a baby as a way into what we're talking about. It's also in a certain way a good transition to what we also have to talk about. In addition to the radiant core, we have to talk about the not so radiant periphery, where we often find ourselves. And so it occurs to me that I'm assuming that everybody at some point in their life has been around a newborn, or it doesn't have to be a newborn, it can be a baby of a few months. But there is a particular quality of presence that they have. And what's often astonishing is how present they are. How, almost in command of the room. And I say that facetiously, but there's some sense of just, when they're not sleeping, when they're awake, one has a sense of this open, awake energy. They just are there and kind of looking around in a somewhat soft focus or unfocused way, taking it all in. And one has just this sense of this enormous sensitivity that has just come into the world, this enormous feeling sense. And one can also get a sense that the baby has not yet divided its world the way we have, and gone into the various trances that produces. And so one of the most basic divisions is between inside and outside. Inside and outside. And if you can just go back there with me, because this is all in us still. It hasn't gone anywhere. We've just kind of differentiated and gotten more complex, but at the root, the conscious presence that we are is still baby. It hasn't yet felt as though inside is different than outside. There's like one pervading field of awareness. And so, at some point, babies start realizing, this is a hand and they can touch this and it makes a sensation, and they touch something else and it doesn't necessarily have the same sensation. And gradually they orient themselves to being inside rather than outside, and some sense of others as being others. Some sense of having certain things one is in control of, one has power over, like one's body, and not those other things that are moving. Gradually that sort of comes into one's sense. And so gradually through inside, outside, and a sense of this and another, one gradually begins to come into this sense of the character that one is in this drama of life, And of course, the adults are helping you all along the way by, first of all, giving you a name, calling your name, trying to get you to respond to your name, trying to identify this character that just has appeared in their life, that they're wanting to play character with them, And that's so important to us as humans, to have this sort of relationship, that we really hone in on that and use all of our verbal skills, even before anybody is speaking, to kind of bring that into consciousness. And then at some point later, I'm not exactly sure what developmental stage, there's often a differentiation between mind and body. And, even the capacity to lie comes online at a certain point. Sense that one can keep something in here and someone out there not know it. So there's a sense of another mind. That there's more than, that this mind is somehow separate from that mind. And a difference between the mind and the body. And then even farther along, we begin to divide up the mind into what I identify with and what I don't want in there. We sort of divide into the wanted and the unwanted, just even in our inner psychic space. And so at some point, we begin to arrive in that world that most of us now call normal. And yet all of these layers in a certain way are reversible. One can come back to this, that sort of wide-eyed presence, to simply hear awake. So this could be a really important practice for you if you want to do baby practice. It could get you out of some of your meditation habits. Those of you who are been meditating a long time and you've gotten the standard meditation instruction, to just sit in that openness. There's a kind of delightful not knowing to it. It's like you're not conceptualizing everything. Pretty soon kids are trying to name everything and conceptualize it and ask questions. They're off to the races. We human beings are so great at symbolization and words and so forth. And, it's delightful to see, but sort of underneath, pervading underneath, is a sense of presence, undifferentiated, not separate. Feel that. It's really meant to be felt. It's not an idea. It's meant to be felt. But that is to be not separate in the world. There's also a lovely kind of experience, which is also difficult to name, which is as you do that, I actually find at the same time it grounds me in the body. And there is a sense, even though there's a sense of, the field of awareness is open, there's a grounding in the body. I've studied with a teacher, Jeannie Zandi, who uses the word sovereignty, vertical sovereignty, to describe a certain experience of being awake and embodied. Where one is not being drawn out into a certain kind of engagement in the world, where what other people think matters, where what other people do matters, and one has judgments about that, or they have judgments about you. Sort of what comes with this whole human thing, this whole social thing, is a lot of social conditioning. A lot of cueing into roles, which in some sense seduce us out of this. Seduce us out of this. And some of that involves a certain amount of injury and shock. So it's not all just smooth sailing, this coming into the world and beginning to have relationships with other beings. And there's this shock where you sense other people are reacting to you. You sense that other people are unhappy with you. There's actual maybe anger or roughness. There are these shocks that begin to kind of hit us. They don't have to be extraordinary. In other words, there is such a thing as abuse, but it doesn't have to be that. These shocks are part of the normal part of living. Something shocks us. And we begin to have this sense we can't just trust this. We can't just trust our presence in the world. And fear begins to take hold, fear and shame. Fear being, like fear of something painful coming at me from outside. Shame being the sense of something wrong inside, something wrong with me. I did something and, someone else didn't like that, took offense at it. And with our growing cognitive awareness, we start to notice, in our deep sensitivity, we start to notice people's harshness. We notice them laughing at us. We notice they're being out of tune. And even depressed and lost and anxious. And all of this to a sensitive system is kind of disturbing. And the most common solution to that is to get less sensitive. Eventually we learn to kind of go up in the head, go up in our ideas, be less sensitive. We numb down. In order to deal with this crazy world of human beings. And we become completely lost in it. And so out of our initial wholeness, there comes these characters, not just one character, but there's actually a whole kind of variety of them that meet various situations, but there's usually one that dominates and tries to control this being to make it fit what's being asked of it from outside. Its sense of where it fits and how it belongs in this human world, and the need to control urges and so forth. There's this sense, gathering sense of a consciousness which is about managing oneself. And out of the flow of experience, we develop this manager. And of course, especially in our culture, there's so much around time and regulation and so forth. We get lost in that kind of manager self. Which operates to a certain degree from fear. There's a level of fear. And so here we find ourselves in the periphery, not in the core. We find ourselves living kind of in a certain way. If I can do it, this is the nervous system. It's not quite that bad, but there's what's coming at me? What do I want? I'm doing a hyper anxious kind of version of it. It doesn't have to be anxious. There can be kind of a laid back version of it. I got a little bit of the laid back version of it. That's why people think I'm so peaceful. Actually, I mostly am these days, but I could look peaceful years ago too, when I wasn't. So, you develop this, depending on what role you're being asked to play in this human drama of your family and your peers and your school and so forth, you develop these various kinds of stances inside and a personality that you project and stuff you're worried about having come out because it won't be accepted, it'll be laughed at, it'll be bad in some way. So you develop this persona, this stance. And oftentimes people come into adulthood or even already into school age fused with something which isn't truly them. That's the periphery. And one starts to know oneself as one's thoughts and feelings, and not so much as presence. And again, depending on the person and their path, one loses some of the sense of heart, some of the sense of affective communication and relationship with the world. I was, reflecting this weekend on the earth. Just a deep appreciation of how we are born from this earth. We human animals have been birthed by this earth for this precise environment, out of the very minerals, chemicals of this earth, through a long, long process. And so one can reflect on that, but if you just go a little bit baby, you might begin to feel it. You might begin to feel this visceral sense of belonging and non-separation from this earth. It's wonderful to do. We can come out of the trance of having instrumentalized this earth, turn it into something useful for us humans. We have this ability to change our environment. So, some animals have a degree of that. They dig a burrow. No, we pave highways and build skyscrapers and fly airplanes, send a probe to Mars. There's something beautiful about that, but there's also a consciousness which is dangerous, where it all just becomes material for our plans, for our consumption, for our use. And this is, one of the things that's interesting to me about the radiant core is it sort of can sound like something set apart. People use this word transcendent. But my sense of it is that it's utterly integrated. See if I can find a better way to say that. as one discovers one's inner home in awareness, it's not separate from one's physical home, the body. In a sense it is, in a sense it's not. And the body, as this incredibly complex and sensitive system, can feel when it's in integrity and when it's not. This is part of the miracle for me. I talk a lot about integrity. I talk a lot about wholesomeness and unwholesomeness, as does the Buddhist tradition. But there's a way that one can tune in. If one's not too, out in one's opinions, out in one's accomplishments, one's tasks, one's responsibilities, this kind of thing. If you're not out in this thing all the time, you come back in here, right in a sense of integrity. There's a connectedness with others, with the earth, with the plants. It's not building a little transcendent bubble where you can be living in joy while the rest of the world goes to hell. There is this rootedness in the body, which feels. How you doing? There's a part of me that in some ways wishes for my old self back. The guy who was so good at theory, when I was in graduate school, I studied systematic theology. And in a certain way, it's about getting all your thoughts in order around faith and why it makes sense. I don't do that anymore. But it was, there's a sense of having all the thoughts in a clear, coherent system that could be presented. What I'm doing now is not necessarily a clear, coherent system. I hope that it's coming across somehow clearly. But I'm just feeling into it and observing what I notice to be real in this moment. When I talk about this, the integrity of this system, and this, it's immersion in an ocean of awareness. And a sense of how all the things we see having to do with time and change are all being met in a moment called now, which seems to not move. That is eternally here. So I'm trying to orient you in a certain way. And what I suggest as you listen is to just let this pass through you and see where it brings you, rather than struggle to get it all straight. See where it brings you. See what you begin to notice. Okay, I'm going to stop there.